Hello, one and all, and welcome to an episode of Top Deck Thoughts. Sorry I've been gone for a while. I've been actually busy with vacation. For those who don't know, I've been on vacation in Denver for the past few days. I was visiting my brother because finally he had his wedding, so I was participating in his wedding as a groomsman. It was a very fun time. I enjoyed it. Nice hiking, just nice seeing the sights, eating some nice food. It was a great vacation. Even my brother got me this nice little gift in the back of the new poster that I have in the back there. So, very nice vacation. But let's get back and actually get catched up with some of the cards. And what we're going to talk about in today's episode of Top Deck Thoughts is actually the cards that have been spoiled so far for Modern Horizons 2, as well as the new standard set that's coming in July, the Dungeons and Dragons Adventures in the Forgotten Realm. Now, we're first going to talk about Modern Horizons 2, since this one is actually coming up pretty shortly. It's coming in next month, coincidentally on my birthday, which I kind of find a little bit hilarious. I'm not going to lie, that's actually pretty funny. But nevertheless, we're going to catch up with all the cards that have been spoiled so far. And then once we do that, we're going to talk about the cards from the D&D set. Probably in a jump script, that way then I can actually change the screen and such and editing and such, so... Nevertheless, let's actually get started on the cards. So, first let's actually talk about these two cards. These are reprints that are going to be old border reprints that are only going to be available in the collector boosters. There's probably going to be a few cycle of these cards. Giver of Runes and Force of Negation. Pretty much the more popular modern staple cards are going to get this old border treatment, and you can only find them in collector boosters. So... I mean, it's nice that we got these as a reprint, but the fact that they are only available in the collector boosters is a bit of a oof. But still, it is nice to have at least reprints in the market to hopefully help them out to get more cards in the market, so... Now, one card that is coming to Modern for the first time, as well as being a much needed reprint, Cabal Coffers. A land that you just pretty much tap for 2 mana, add a swamp for each swamp you control. Many people know that this is a very popular commander card. And the reason why is because in any monocolor black deck, you pretty much play Cabal Coffers. Main primary reason, this can generate a lot of mana very quick. Like, it can pretty much in a slow format like Commander, you can get a lot of swamps on your battlefield really quick, play your Cabal Coffers, get a bunch of mana, and then just use it to ramp into a ridiculously big spell, or use the mana to storm off, depending on how your deck design works. You get a lot of mana with Cabal Coffers, is pretty much the long story short. Now, one thing to keep in mind, other than the fact that it's a great Commander reprint, and also getting more in the market will help reduce the price, which is really nice since Cabal Coffers can be really pricey, ranging from about $100 sometimes, so it is nice to have this reprint in the market, even though it is at Mythic, which is But, I think the one thing to keep in mind with this card, though, is its potential in Modern. Because remember, this is a reprint that is going to now make this card Modern legal. Which I think a lot of people are missing that, and I do think that's actually really huge. Now, I don't play much Modern, I play it kind of like casually from time to time, so I'm not exactly a professional player in the format, so take what I'm about to say with my analysis with a grain of salt. But I do think Cabal Coffers might be a pretty silly card in Modern. Disregarding the potential that if you get Blood Moon, presuming. But in Cabal Coffers, I feel like the popular thing that this card can actually do is, one, it can make mono-color control decks pretty popular, like Mono Black Control. They can use Cabal Coffers and help pretty much get significant mana really quick, which can help them for any big X finisher spells, which there's a few in Modern to keep in mind. Also just helps ramp into some very silly creatures, so something to keep in mind. But I think one of the things that's going to be the more cheekier way to use this card is this is a card that actually can potentially see play in, of all things, Primeval Titan decks. And the main reason why is kind of obvious, because there's a lot of ways that, essentially, thanks to the fact of Dryad of Legion Grove, you can make all your land swamps relatively easily. You can even run Urborg in your deck design if you need to, since Urborg is Modern legal. So then you can use that Primeval Titan, tutor out for 2 Cabal coffers, and pretty much generate a ton of mana. Which then, as stated before, if you're playing in mono black control, you can then use it for a really big at spell and such, and potentially just win the game for that. So I'm grateful for this reprint. It's nice. It's going to be great for Commander, but also keep an eye on it for Modern. I think it is going to do some silly shenanigans, so keep an eye on it. Nevertheless, one card that I would be very surprised if it sees Modern play, but it's going to see so much Commander play. Yeah. Urza Fortune's Flame. Free mana for a 2/free legendary creature Elfreet with flying. And it has, whenever this creature attacks, choose a number between 1 and 5. If you do, you flip that many coins. For each flip you win, draw a card. For each flip you lose, it deals 2 damage to you. If you win 5 flips this way, you may cast spells from your hand this turn without paying their mana cost. Okay, so this is obviously for Commander, just going to be fun in the coin flip decks that we have seen in the format. You can definitely cheat this out with stuff like Clark's Thumb and such, so it's very fun to have kind of like this for Commander in general. Is this going to see play in Modern? Probably not. Like, the only thing that I can see this card having some practical applications in the format is, let's say, for example, you're playing decks that want you want to ping yourself, essentially. Like, there's that one where essentially it's the, I always forget the name of this one drop, but the one that can become as big as a 13/13 depending on your life total, essentially. Someone will mention it to me in the comments. I'm legitimately having a brain fart on it at the moment. But in decks that where you want to actually be at a low life total, Urza could in some instances be beneficial because maybe you don't mind if 10 damage is dealt to you because you want to be at a low life total to help activate your cards or such. And worst case scenario, if you don't lose the life, you're still going to draw between 1 to 5 cards, which could be very beneficial. So, but it is legendary, which kind of hurts it a little bit. So, I mean, I could see some people cheekily trying this. Like, I could see Saffron Olive trying this in, like, an Against the Odds deck or something like that. But, I think this is mostly just a fun Commander card, and it makes sense, especially since for the fact that they're offering bundles for this, and you can actually get the bundle promo of this card. I think their main purpose is they want you to play this casually in, like, kitchen table Magic, or just essentially Commander. So, going to be a fun Commander card. If it sees Modern play, I would be surprised. But not impossible. Next up, we got Flametongue Yearling, which is a very, very clever callback to Flametongue Kavu. 2 red for a 2/1. But it also has multi-kicker for 2. For those who don't know what multi-kicker is, when you cast a spell, you may pay additional 2 any times you cast a spell, so you can put more mana into it, aka kicking it. And then Flametongue Yearling enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter for each time it was kicked. And then when it enters the battlefield, it deals damage equal to its power to target creature. I think this is mostly going to be just a great limited card. It's kind of a cute limited card, just being able to just, if you need to, you can just play this as a 2-mana 2/1 that deals 2 damage to a creature, and that's perfectly fine. And then the fact that later down the line, this can get bigger and bigger and bigger. Like, let's say, for example, you play 4 mana, then you just essentially get a free 2 that deals free damage to a target creature. That's not bad. If you didn't do 6, then it's a 4/3, etc., etc., etc. So, this is a card that is modular and kind of like can scale up due to the multi-kicker, so that makes it a perfectly great Commander, or not Commander card. It makes a perfectly great limited card. I could though see this as in the kicker decks in Commander, though, seeing this play, since it's another kicker card they could put in their deck design. That does have at least some practical applications when it's kicked. In Modern, probably not. I mean, I don't know. I think there are better 2-drops in the format, but I think for Limited, this is a great card. But who knows? I could be wrong. Maybe there's a deck that can actually make the C play. Though I will say, the sketch art on this is legit cool. Like, the fact that they're doing these sketch promos for this set is actually legit really cool. Next up, let's talk about the card that made me automatically think of Bolten. For those who don't know, the inside joke of that, Bolten just really likes dinosaurs, so anytime a dinosaur gets shown, pretty much like, hey, Bolten, here's a dinosaur. But essentially, it's Frosta, Tempest Roar, 10 and 2 green for a legendary creature dinosaur. This spell costs 3 less for each other spell you cast this turn. It has Trample, it has Haste, it has Trample over Planeswalkers, which means if you deal any excess damage to a Planeswalker with this, that excess damage is dealt to the Planeswalker's controller. Oh, and also it has Hexproof as long as it enters the battlefield this turn. Okay, this card is kind of silly. Now, this is kind of the least exciting commander that we have seen, honestly. But mostly I think the reason why it's legendary, and even it was stated in the preview when they previewed this card in Weekly MTG, that was more just used as a design balancing act, because more or less, if you got multiple copies of this creature, if it was non-legendary, then it's absurd, especially if you can storm off and get, like, multiple 7/7s on the battlefield. Like, you could do some really silly shenanigans with that. So, mostly the reason why it's legendary is mostly for a balance perspective. That being said, this is still a potentially silly card for the format, because, well, there is just so many storming shenanigans we could do. Like, there are easy ways to cast this for very cheap, stuff like with Mana Force, like any of the Moxes that are currently legal in the format. Like, there's a lot of ways to actually make this cast for pretty cheap and more or less get a free mana to potentially 2 mana 7/7 Trampler with Haste that has Hexproof as long as it enters the battlefield this turn, which, keep that in mind, yeah, it's semi-Hexproof, but if you do have any ways of flickering the card, that's something to keep in mind with this card. So if you flicker it and then just repeat your combat stuff, then it still has a semi-Hexproof. So there are ways to if you use stuff like Ephemerate, to keep the Hexproof on for a little longer than it would usually have it. So I think it's definitely going to be a card that people will try out, especially in Storm builds in Modern. I don't see this for Commander, personally. I see people will play it in the 99, but not really as the main Commander. Honestly, you just got Golta, if we're being quite frankly honest. But it's still a fun card. It's definitely going to be fun to see the shenanigans that this card will provide. Next up, Unmarked Grave. 1 in the black for a sorcery, search a library for a non-legendary card, put that card into your hand, then shuffle, aka shuffle your library. Now, obviously, this is a modern balanced take on Entomb. Now, the reason why they specifically state the non-legendary card for this is pretty obvious, mostly because they don't want you to do some stupid stuff with Unmarked Grave. Like, a majority of reanimated strategies, in general, the popular ones that we go into older formats, the main primary purpose is to take a very, very powerful legendary creature, put it into the graveyard, get it out cheaper than you would usually do. Like, we're talking stuff like, for example, Grizzlebland, Emrakul, even some of the Phyrexians. Like, there's just some really silly shenanigans you could do with Entomb pretty much in the reanimated strategies in the Eternal formats. So this is a balanced version for Modern. But even then, as many people have pointed out, there is still some very, very powerful creatures that are still non-legendary that you can essentially tutor by putting it into your graveyard and reanimate later. Also, another thing to keep in mind, we do have Escape as well as cards that have Flashback in the format, and as long as those cards are not legendary, hey, Unmarked Grave is not affected by it. You could also use this to pretty much put a Tanglevine into your graveyard, maybe put a big Delve creature in your graveyard. So, Unmarked Grave is definitely a balanced Entomb, but it is actually one that I am going to keep my eye on for the format. Though, it is going to be a great card for Commander, because you need as many as Entomb style like cards you can get, especially if you're playing a reanimated based deck design. So, yeah, Unmarked Grave is going to be a very great Commander card. Unless if you're relying a lot on reanimating legendary creatures, of course. Next up, a card that is pretty silly. Profane Tutor. For the low cost of 0, or suspending it for 1 in a black, aka you can only pay it for its suspend cost unless you're using things like As Foretold or stuff like Cascade and such. We'll get to that in a minute. But suspend for 1 in a black, so you spend this 2 mana, you put 2 time counters on it, and you have to wait 2 turns before you cast it. If you do, then you search your library for a card, and put that card into your hand, then shuffle your library. So, obviously, this is a suspended demonic tutor. That is pretty good in Commander. I'm not gonna lie, this is actually a pretty powerful Commander card. Now, I think this is more going to be a good demonic tutor for more casual to maybe even just mid-range deck designs, if I'm being honest, for Commander. Mostly just for the fact is, the reason why tutors in general are very popular is because you can get the answer automatically. While Profane Tutor, you have to wait unless you find a way to cheap out casting it, like using stuff like Electrodominance, As Foretold, etc., etc. Which there are Commander decks that do that deck design, so you do have to keep that in mind. But I do think this is going to be a nice budget tutor option for a lot of people, potentially. Just being able to, if they don't mind suspending it, they can just suspend it, maybe do some politics and such, and saying, look, as long as you don't attack me for these turns while I tutor, I'm just going to tutor something that will help us out in the current circumstance. But still, there is some pretty silly shenanigans you can do with this, and the factor that it has the Richard Kane Ferguson art is glorious. Like, this is so great in the old border. So, Profane Tutor, definitely a downgraded demonic tutor, but keep an eye on it. Also, like I said, for Modern, mostly it's probably going to see play in the decks that might want this, which is the quote-unquote As Foretold, Electro Dominance, even Dreadhorde Arcanist type of deck designs that can essentially cast this for free without having to do the suspend. Will they rather play a tutor rather than the other powerful suspend cards that they have in the format? That we have to wait to see. But it is definitely something to keep in mind. So, I do love this card for Commander, especially for a casual Commander. And who knows, maybe just another tutor for C88 shenanigans, depending on the deck design. So, keep an eye on it. Next up, let's get this card over with, because it's going to cause some grief. It's a free 2 Elemental Incarnation with Menace. When it enters the battlefield, target opponent reveals their hand. You choose a non-land card from it. That player discards that card, and it has Evoke, which allows you to exile a black card from your hand to cast it for that cost, but then you have to automatically sacrifice it. Okay, so they're essentially giving us an Unmask, which is a very powerful legacy card, on a creature that we can cast for retrospectively free as long as we exile a card, which if we have the mana, we can just ephemerate or flicker it to be able to repeat the ETB effect, thus mind rotting / thought seizing our opponent on turn 1. That's absurd. This is a very absurd card for Modern. Let's just cut to the chase. If this is probably the most powerful card they spoiled so far before the official spoiler season, because there's just so many dumb shenanigans you can do with this on turn 1. Like the Ephemerate, Feign, or Cloud Shift and such, being able to flicker it and get a turn 1 free 2 with Menace that does a Mind Rot that is a selective Mind Rot, that's absurd. And then even worst case scenario, you could just evoke this and then like maybe cast a Village Rites, automatically sacking the creature before the evoke sack happens and just draw 2 cards, thus replenishing what you have to pay. That's also pretty absurd. There's also the fact that you can reanimate this and then get the Thought-like Seize effect. And being a free 2 with Menace is perfectly fine, but yeah, this is definitely going to be a card that's going to feel pretty bad if people can consistently play this on turn 1 and do the flickering shenanigans as many people have been cautiously concerned about. This is a very push card, and I am kind of going to be very cautious of the whole cycle in general, because if the whole cycle is in general the do a powerful ETP effect, but you can evoke it by just exiling the card color, pretty much card from your hand essentially, like exile blue card, exile green card, etc., 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 then Ephemerate might be getting a run for its money and might make some silly shenanigans of deck design. So, keep an eye on Grief. it's going to cause some people to say good grief. And yeah, that joke has already been made about 25,000 times. Okay. This card I just actually like a lot because there's a lot of people who I know that one of my personal friends who plays Modern at our local store plays Merfolk, as well as, of course, everybody's pretty much peeing the professor when this card essentially got announced. Rishidan Dockhand, a 1 mana Merfolk. That's a 1/2. It has Island Walk, but it also has 1 to and tap it to tap target land. So, of course, this is a callback to Rishadan Port, a very, very powerful legacy-style land that allows you to do mana denial and such. That is attached on a 1 mana 1/2 Merfolk with Island Walk. Is that good? Yeah, that's actually pretty good. Like, worst case scenario, if we ignore the fact of the being a semi take on Rishadan Port, this is just a 1 mana 1/2 Merfolk with Island Walk. There's going to be a lot of Merfolk decks that are going to just play it because it's a 1 mana 1/2 with Island Walk. Pretty much, especially when you see how a majority of Merfolk tribal decks in Modern play. They mostly, the main purpose is they try to make your opponent's lands into islands, which then essentially then allows them to attack in for damage. This can be an easy one drop that can then attack in for peen points of damage. That's very nice. Plus, also, as many people had pointed out already, one of the nifty things is the fact that you do have the Rishadan portability on this, which actually could be beneficial in Merfolk. Weirdly enough, since they do have the strategy of making pretty much opponents' lands to islands, if you don't need to, then you could use the Rishadan Dockhand's tap ability to tap the land that hasn't become an island yet, so you can deny them specific mana to help them that would help them cast their spells, thus letting them be less effective, be able to cast like board wipes or such, or the plague engineers and such. Also, it's a 1/2, which does help it against plague engineers, so you got to keep that in mind. So, yeah, this card is pretty good. I mean, I'm not sure if it's going to upgrade the Merfolk deck to a tier or anything, but I do think a lot of Merfolk players, they got thrown a bone with this card, and it's a pretty nice card. It's a good card, it's very effective, and if you need Rishadan Port like cards within your commander deck designs, especially if you're playing Merfolk Tribal commander deck designs, you're gonna like this card a lot. Next up, a really, really good callback card. Timeless Dragon, which is a 5 mana, 5/5 dragon with flying, but also has plane cycling 2, which allows you to discard this card and you search your library for a planes card. You reveal it and then put it into your hand. But it also has Eternalize for 2 and a white, and 2 and 2 white specifically. And what you do is you will exile the card from your graveyard, which then allows you to create a token that's a copy of it, except it's a 4/4 black zombie dragon with no mana cost. And then you just Eternalize only as a sorcery. So, first of all, great callback card. This is a callback to Eternity Dragon. Very great callback. It's lovely just to see how many people that I follow on Twitter and such who had nostalgia with Eternity Dragon. Just seeing this card and just being a nice callback to that card. Like, a lot of people had a lot of nostalgia just flowing right back in by seeing this card. Now, is the card good? Let's talk about it. Okay, so in Commander, I would say an optimistic yes, I would say. Because at worst case scenarios, you're going to be mostly playing this for the plane cycling. And plane cycling is very powerful since it allows you to get the shocks or the triomes or any lands that do have the plane subtype within their land type. So being able to toot out for specific planes, very nice with Timeless Dragon, especially in the Commander format. I mean, this is definitely going to be a card that I think we'll see some tempting play, at least in mono-white commander decks, because the plane cycling is always something they like to keep an eye on. Plus, also just the ability that if you don't have any reanimated base strategy, so you can just Eternalize it for 4 mana and still get a 4/4 flyer out of it. Very nice for commanders. So I do think this is a very nice commander card that's going to have a lot of nostalgia. For modern, honestly, I don't see it. The problem is, yeah, the plane cycling is nice and all, but just a 5 mana 5/5 flyer dragon is not really something to write home about. In Modern, it's mostly a format that tries to win by turn 3, turn 4, or even earlier and such. And playing a 5 mana 5/5 flyer on curve is not going to cut it. Like, especially since it doesn't have haste or anything like that. Plus, there is also the factor that maybe if you do try to plane cycle and then play this on turn 4 and get the token, cool, you get a 4/4 flyer. That dies the fatal push. That's a little bit anticlimactic if I say so myself. That being said, if you do have ways or methods where you benefit from the card being exiled from the graveyard with other synergies, maybe, but I don't see it. Though I will say, I do love this card as a nice callback, I do love the art on it, I do love the old border, and I do just love the fact that this is actually a really nice commander card. Modern, I would be very, very, very surprised. Next up, let's actually talk about a new Planeswalker, or aka maybe an old Planeswalker, depending on how long you've been in Magic the Gathering and observing the lore. Dakon Shadowslayer. Esper for Legendary Planeswalker, Dakon, and it has when this Planeswalker enters the battlefield with a number of loyalty counters on him equal to the number of lands you control. Okay. So this is pretty obvious. If you, for some reason, found a way to cheat this out with only one land on the battlefield, you're only going to get one loyalty. If you have, like, 6 lands, you get 6 loyalty, etc., etc. But what does it do? Well, it has +1, which is Surveil 2, which for those who don't know how Surveil works, it's semi-scry with the exception that with the cards you quote-unquote scry, you have the choice of putting them in your graveyard rather than keeping them on top if you don't want to, so keep that in mind. It also has a -3 to exile target creature. It also has a -6 that you may put an artifact card from your hand or graveyard onto the battlefield. Okay, where to start with this card? Okay, this is definitely a very balanced Planeswalker, I would say, for Modern, but I do think it's a card you don't want to sleep on. Mostly because it has that ability to be able to have any loyalty, depending on your land count, at any time. Keep in mind what I'm going to say there. First of all, I think this is going to be a nice control Planeswalker. Just being able to +1, Surveil 2, semi-scry, very nice, especially if you have any reanimator based strategy designs, which Dakon does semi-encourage to a basic extent. And also just being able to have a free mana if you play this on turn 4 and still have 1 loyalty, exile target creature, semi-removal, and still have a powerful Planeswalker on the battlefield. That's very nice. And then, of course, you could just wait till you get to 6 lands, which you could do that through semi-ramp of some sort, to essentially then just do the reanimator / kind of like sneak attack-ish like ability where you can essentially cheap out an artifact. And there's, of course, very powerful artifacts in the Modern format, as well as Commander, mind you, that can be very cheaped out pretty quick with Dakon's -6, which, as long as you have 6 lands, which in Commander you're going to have 6 lands, is going to be very nice. Now, however, I do think this is a card that we'll see play in control decks to an extent, because I think there's one thing that people are kind of missing about Dakon that makes the card kind of absurd when you think about it. This is a card that you can actually flicker, and if you flicker it, it's actually better when it's flickered. And what I mean by that is, due to the fact of how this card works with it entering the battlefield with loyalty counters equal to the number of lands you control, this is a card that gets better later down the game. Like, let's say you keep having the -3 for some random reason, or Surveil 2, and you want to get to the ultimate quick, but you can't get to it through the method of just plussing. As long as you have 6 or 7 lands, you can just simply just cast a cheap, like, flicker spell, which we do have a few ways to flicker pretty much Planeswalkers in the format. Stuff like, I'm thinking about the 2-cost Fairy spell, or even just other ones that flicker specifically non-land permanents. Just do one of those, and then it comes back in with the highest count, with highest loyalty, depending on how many lands you have. So this could be just use any flicker spell, make it into a reanimate artifact spell, or sneak attack artifact spell. Or even if you need to, you just flicker it just to have a high loyalty Planeswalker that you can just use to constantly exile creatures, which exiling creatures, very powerful in the format that especially has graveyard-based shenanigans, so I don't know. I feel like this is a card that I think a lot of people are going to think it's a fair balance card, and I do think it is to an extent. But I do think you want to keep an eye on it for flicker-based deck designs because this card kind of gets really silly in flicker decks. Like, this is a card that I would be kind of surprised if it doesn't see play in Enamatu. Let's just put it like that for Commander as well as for Modern. So, keep an eye on Dakon. I do think this card actually does have some legit chance to actually see some play, just based on the factor that it's very powerful flickering Planeswalker, which we don't really see Planeswalkers that get powerful when you flicker them. So that's kind of a first. Okay, so these are all the cards that got spoiled from the reveal stream as of today of this recording. Now we're going to talk about the cards that got revealed during the pretty much the previous spoiler daily MTG event, which is them announcing the pretty much legendary summer event essentially for this summer. So let's talk about them. Let's talk first about Diamond Lion. 2 mana for a 2/2. It's a bear. But it's a bear with slight upside where you can tap it, keyword tap it, so it has summoning sickness, so you can't tap it automatically as you play it. Keep that in mind. But you discard your hand, and then you sacrifice Diamond Lion, you add free mana of any one color, and then you activate only as an instant. So, this is obviously a callback to Lion's Eye Diamond. And as many people know who play Commander or play any Eternal formats, Lion's Eye Diamond is a pretty powerful mana rock. Or a mana, pretty much a Servant. Is Diamond Lion the same? Yes and no. Let me explain. Now, like I said, let's talk about the few costs about this card compared to Lion's Eye Diamond. 1. It's a creature, which means that as a creature, it has summoning sickness. And the fact that you have to tap to activate this ability does hurt the card a lot. Like, the main benefit and power with stuff like Lion's Eye Diamond in the format and such is you're able to automatically just be able to play the Lion's Eye Diamond, get the mana real quick, just being able to do that and then go off with Storm-based shenanigans. Diamond Lion is a more fair card that essentially allows you, opponent, to be able to interact with the card as long as you don't have any haste modifiers within your deck design, which you could incorporate within your deck design, keep that in mind. That essentially, as long as you don't have any haste enablers, they have a turn to respond to this before you can activate the ability. That being said, as stated before, there's a few benefits that this card has over Lion's Eye Diamond, weirdly enough, because it's a creature. First off, this is a card that you can play, since it's a cat, but also, okay, I'm joking because of cat, but since it's a 2-drop, you can actually play this in Lurrus-based deck designs in Modern, which is a popular archetype. So being able to use Lurrus to essentially recast this and then just have a pretty much a Black Lotus every time you'd be able to recast this. Yeah, it has Summoning Sickness, but still you get a 2/2 that can either be used as block or for aggressiveness. And then just being able to then, when you need to, just be able to ramp for a little bit of mana. That does provide some significant shenanigans, especially if you can play it right. Like, for example, you could say, for example, maybe use this in Madness-style decks, potentially. Maybe Madness will like this. You could also use this in Reanimator, where you're essentially just reanimating maybe through a land of some sorts. Well, no, that doesn't work, but you kind of have to think a little different with this card. Also, keep in mind, we do have cards in the format that can give this haste relatively cheap. So you could, in theory, make this a 2-mana, just Black Lotus. So, yeah, you gotta keep that in mind. This is a card that I love the flavor of it, but I will admit it is a card that I have to wait and see before it sees Modern play. Will it see play in Commander? Yeah. It's a Mott's Lotus, or not Mott's Lotus, wow, brain fart. It's a Lion's Eye Diamond that can be a much budget-friendly Lion's Eye Diamond. Yeah, it has cost to it, but it's still Lion's Eye Diamond, and people do like playing Lion's Eye Diamond within their deck design if they can. So, yeah, keep an eye on it. It will definitely see Commander play. Modern play is kind of up in the air, if I'm being honest. Now, one that's also up in the air, but weirdly enough, I'm a little bit more optimistic of this card. Weirdly enough. Brainstorm. 1 mana for an artifact. You tap 2 and tap it. Sacrifice Brainstorm. And when you do, you draw 3 cards. Then put 2 cards from your hands on top of your library in any order. This one I'm surprisingly a lot more optimistic. Now, yes, this is a callback to Brainstorm, and yes, the power of Brainstorm is the fact that it's 1 mana, and the fact that you have to pay a 1 mana artifact that does nothing, and then you have to sacrifice it for 2 mana to get the effect. Yes, that is very costly considered to Brainstorm. Why do I think this card's good? Honestly, I think this card's good because it's just a 1 mana cheap artifact. Which you could play in stuff like Lurrus. You can also play this in any artifact-based synergy decks. And also, I think the one thing that people kind of will take for granted about Brainstorm, this is a card that gives you access to a Brainstorm-like effect in multicolored deck designs. One of the catch-22s with Brainstorm is you mostly want to just play Brainstorm in kind of like a mono blue, or any deck that has a primary strong blue base within their deck design. Brainstorm, you don't have that restriction. You can play this in any deck design, so that allows you to open the opportunity to have a Brainstorm-like effect in multiple colored deck designs, which, considering that a majority of Miracle-style decks are multicolored deck designs, you gotta keep that in mind. Plus, also, it's a cheap artifact. Maybe you have artifact-based synergies, so that's something else to keep in mind. So, overall, I actually like Brainstorm. Still, well, I am going... I wonder if they intentionally made it where you're going to accidentally say Brainstorm when it's Brainstone. Honestly, I do actually like Brainstone a lot. I do think this actually has a chance to see some modern play, legitimately honest. As well as I do think it will see some commander play. I'm definitely wanting to try this in my Oscar deck, just having multiple Brainstones by just exiling it, so then I could have access to multiple activations of Brainstorm. That's very nice. So, keep an eye on this. Or keep an eye on its multiple eyes and noses and... well, it has some interesting art, let's put it like that. Next up, I am going to talk about real quick, just a quick reprint. Counterspell's coming back in the format. We haven't seen Counterspell. We only seen it in the Eternal formats, but now with this reprint, it's going to be Modern Legal. Will it see play? Absolutely, especially if you're playing like any mono-color control deck or any deck that would most likely play Mana Leak. You probably are going to upgrade Mana Leak over count and just play Counterspell. Now, there is a cost, compare and contrast, like maybe the 1 in a blue on those counter-like spells that are over Counterspell, maybe you do want the factor of the 1 in a blue, especially if you're a multicolor control deck. That being said, Counterspell is just a very powerful spell. We know this spell in Commander. This is a popular Commander spell, just if you need counter magic, you play a Counterspell. And I think in Modern, it's definitely going to be tried, especially in Esper, / also maybe even Azorius control decks, because they're going to play stuff like Teferi Hero Dominaria and just untap 2 islands when you do your card draw and hold up Counterspell. Enough said. Next up, a card that is one of the more interestingly designed cards. Urza Saga. It's an enchantment land, Urza Saga. Okay, a lot of people who like mechanical puns are loving the fact of how, due to the naming convention of this card, it's actually both named Urza Saga as the name, but also due to the land subtype and the fact that it's a saga, it's also named Urza Saga as its enchantment land type, its subtype, which is absolutely hilarious. And for many people who don't know, Urza Saga is a set that's within the past and pretty much been known as one of the most powerful sets that came in Magic's history. It allowed for some pretty busted cards that did some really silly shenanigans. Also, intentionally was supposed to be designed as an enchantment set, but mostly was known for pretty much busted artifacts and lands. So the fact that we got an enchantment land that's named Urza Saga, just the flavor on this is just... Okay, let's talk about the card, though. So, what does this card do? First of all, it's the first type of an enchantment land, but it's also a saga land. So, you don't have to pay for the saga, you just have to play it as a land. And what does it do? Well, when it enters the battlefield, it does these following steps through the saga phases. Step 1. This land gains tap it to add a colorless mana, so it becomes a waste. Then on step 2, it then gains 2 and tap it, create a 0/0 colorless construct artifact creature token with this creature gets +1/+1 for each artifact you control, so it makes a construct, as we like to call them. And then on step 3, which then automatically sacrifices the Saga, aka this land gets sacrificed. You then search your library for an artifact card with mana cost 0 or 1. That is very distinct. You're going to keep this in mind. And then you put it onto the battlefield, and then you shuffle your library. So, one thing to keep in mind with the third step. Mana cost and mana value are totally different things. Mana cost means that the card has to have that cost within its mana cost. It can't be a mana value of 0. It has to have a 0 mana cost. So, you can't use this to cheat out, like, artifact lands, or any of the, like, you can't use this to cheat out, like, the Mox that has Suspend and such. So, no, this is not going to work on any Suspend artifacts or any artifact lands. The artifact does have to have a mana cost of 0 or 1, which does make it where you can tutor out stuff like Soul Ring or any of the legal Moxes that have a mana cost of 0 on it, so that's something to keep in mind. What do I think of this card? Honestly, I think this is going to be a card that is going to be great in Commander, personally. Mostly just for the factor that this is a waste that can essentially be used to, once you go through the steps, tutor out for your Soul Ring or any of your powerful, cheap mana rocks, essentially. That's probably it's going to be a primary use. You just go through the few steps, use it as a land when you need to. If you have a necessary need to make a construct in the second step, cool. But mostly, you're just going to use it for the fact that once it gets to its third step, you search for your mana rock that you don't got in play, put it into play, and then you sacrifice this land. So in Commander, I think this is going to see a lot of play, especially if you have a lot of artifact costs within the mana cost range of 0 and 1. Yeah, in an artifact-based Commander deck, they're going to love Urza Saga. In Modern, this is where I get a little bit kind of scenario with this card, because here's the thing. The fact that it's an enchantment land is both a strength and it's both a weakness. The factor is it's a strength because you can use it for any Constellation Matter deck designs, which there are some cheap, quote-unquote, very cheap Constellation Matter cards that can benefit with Urza Saga. The con, though, is the factor is that we have a lot, and I mean a lot, of cheap enchantment removal for 1 mana, aka Nature's Claim, that you can actually use this to essentially just remove this land. Now, a lot of people are going to take what I said there and be like, ain't that just like saying that it dies to Doomblade or stuff? Yes, but let me put it like this. I'm not going to put it like that. Let me put it like this. Let's say you're a Panzer or a land destruction player, and you're telling that you have an ability to have a 1 mana spell to destroy a target land as early as turn 1. You're probably going to do that. And I think a lot of people, if Urza Saga becomes a popular enough land in the Modern format, are just going to classically just, opponent plays land, then you just turn 1. Essentially, if you play the land first before your opponent plays the Urza Saga, you then nature claims it, and then you make them lose a land for 1 mana. So, yeah, I think that's going to be the one thing that's going to keep this card in check. That being said, it's definitely one of the more unique design cards of the set. I love the mechanical flavor. I love the art. It's a cool card. It's definitely going to be a card that will see Commander play. And for Modern, people at least are going to try it. I'm going to say that. People will at least try Urza Saga. Then, next, before we get to the one that people are known, that this Modern Horizons tune is going to be known for, we also got a reprint of Sanctum Prelate. 1 and 2 white for a creature-human cleric. As it enters the battlefield, choose a number. Non-creature spells with mana value equal to the chosen number can't be cast. Now, specifically, this is the Buy a Bots promo, so if you buy a Bots, you actually get a foil of this, and is this card good? Yeah, it's pretty good. Here's the thing. Anybody who plays Legacy will know the power of this card, because the factor is, if you can cheat this out with, say, like an Aether Vial or stuff like that, or just cast this normally as a human in Human Tribal, just being able to name a very specific number and make your opponent not be able to cast some specific spells that are non-creature is very powerful. Like, you know how we've been talking about the potential for Counterspell and such? Well, imagine an opponent's able to get a Sanctum Prelate down and just say, oh, you can't cast spells with converted mana cost 2. Or say, for example, maybe you can say maybe your opponent will choose 0, which then will shut down any Foretell as foretold or any deck that relies on casting it for free, essentially, any suspend spells and such. Like, the power level of this card, it's a very powerful controlled card in the right decks, especially if you have any way of hand disruption, which, hey, we're getting some hand disruption in the format, as we mentioned earlier, thanks to Grief, so yeah, I would say keep an eye on Sanctum Prelate for Modern. It's definitely going to see play. For Commander, it sees play in some decks, but it does also not see play in some decks. You know if you play it in your deck design, but it varies. Let's just say it like that. And then, of course, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the main highlight of the show. We are getting a return of the enemy-colored fetch lands. Arid Mesa, Marsh Flats, Misty Rainforest, Scalding Tarn, and Verdant Catacombs. In multiple versions, we have the regular versions that are going to be coming in the set. We also have the extended art versions that are going to be in the collector boosters. And we're going to have the old borders, which I believe are only in the collector boosters, but I am not 100% sure on that. There is the potential. We're going to find out in an article on next week how you access all the cards in the set, essentially depending on their treatments and such. Nevertheless, I think it's remiss to say that, yeah, it's great that we're getting a reprint of the fetch lands. It's nice that we got multiple variations of it. That way it could affect the price of the normal one. Hopefully reduce the price, put more into the market. This card sees multiple play in multiple formats. Sees play in Commander, sees play in Legacy, sees play in Modern. We all know them, we all love them. It's great that they are, it's a great reprint that we're getting in the set. And nevertheless, that is all the cards that are from Modern Horizons 2 so far. In the next Top Deck Thoughts, I'm going to talk about the cards that have been spoiled so far from the new MTG D&D set. I was originally going to put in one video, but look at the time. I think it's better that we split this up into 2, so let's do that. So, nevertheless, thanks everybody for your time. I hope you all have a lovely day. This is LevDev, signing out. Bada beep.